Hey, good afternoon to you. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Congressman Mike Waltz is here at 5 o'clock. And then at 5:30, an attorney for President Trump, Will Scharf, joins us as a judge in New York who donated to Biden, now threatens to throw Trump in jail. No big deal. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Of course, the campus chaos we've been talking about continues around the country. And some Democrats are beginning to wake up to the dark money on the left that's been funding it, including from people like Bill Gates, George Soros, David Rockefeller Jr., Nick Pritzker, and more. But not everybody's waking up to this for the first time. In fact, my next guest has written the book on all of the ways that the dark money on the left is changing our country. Scott Walter joins us now. He's the president of the Capital Research Center and the author of the new book, Arabella, The Dark Money Network of Leftist Billionaires Secretly Transforming America. Scott, great to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Great to be with you, Vince.
This is a big topic, and it's hard to get your arms around all of this because the way most of us think about government is kind of you have your representatives and you've got the president, the vice president, the courts, and you have a basic idea of how they get into office. But what you're tapping into is kind of the unseen world that isn't tracked by normal FEC filings. What did you dig into here, Scott?
We dig into the nonprofit world, right? Both the 501c4 groups, which are things like the NRA and League of Conservation Voters, but then also the C3 groups, right, which are private foundations and quote unquote public charities like think tanks and advocacy groups that actually are a much bigger money in that world than there is in the FEC dollars.
Tell me, let's start with the name of the book, which is Arabella. What is Arabella Advisors?
Sure. The Arabella is best thought of as a network. And you can visualize it as a pyramid. So at the top of the pyramid, you have Arabella Advisors, which is a for-profit beltway band, consulting firm that creates and operates what comes below it in the pyramid. In the middle of the pyramid, you have a half dozen of these nonprofits, C3s and C4s, and that's where the money goes in, right? If you're Bill Gates or George Soros or Zuckerberg, you write a check to those nonprofits. And then at the base of the pyramid, you have what your listeners see, and that's hundreds and hundreds of fake groups, Secure Michigan Elections, Opportunity Wisconsin, Floridians for a Fair Shake. And they're supposed to look like it's your neighbor upset about something, right? But actually, it's some dork at a desk in D.C. with an accounting code and a website and maybe a Facebook ad buy.
And how effective have they been? Where do we see the fruits of their efforts?
Well, all over the place. They're the main funder, actually, of pro-abortion stuff, for instance, using Warren Buffett's money. But another thing, just very recently, those Title IX regulations, you had lots of stuff, right? Talking about the crazy Department of Education Title IX regs. They're going to put men in women's sports and whatnot. They've been planning that since 2019. They had a secret think tank of sorts that was plotting out all kinds of regulatory changes, including that.
And so you've got a number of, as you point out, left-wing billionaires who fund all of this. Who are the names on that list, and who would we recognize?
Well, you'd recognize, Soros, Zuckerberg, Buffett, and the rest. There's one you probably wouldn't recognize, but very important to Arabella, Hans-Jörg Wyss, who is a Swiss billionaire, not even a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, Hans Wyss has been doing this for years, sort of out of sight from most of the attention that the right gives to George Soros. But Hans Wyss has been deeply influential, no?
Yep, very profoundly. So he's given the Arabella Network $250 million, and he's been with them from basically their very beginning. So as far as we can tell, he was their very first sugar daddy. Pierre Omidyar be another one putting millions into the network.
So a guy like Hans Wyss, who's, as you pointed out, he's Swiss, he's not allowed to contribute to a political campaign. The idea is that foreigners are not really supposed to dictate political outcomes in the United States. But he is having a big impact on the way our country is being run. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The irony is he wasn't very smart when he first started trying to do this, right? He actually wrote checks to things like Friends of Dick Durbin Committee, which is completely illegal, but unfortunately the statute of limitations ran out before anybody caught him. Then he got smarter, and he gives by the hundreds of millions to Arabella. By the way, he also has given hundreds of millions to other left-wing nonprofits outside their network. So, incredibly influential guy in things like ballot initiatives, environmental policy, and the like.
Let's talk about the election. What influence has the Arabella network had on the way elections are conducted in the United States?
Well, that's one of the scariest things, right? So everybody on your show has heard of Zuckbucks, something that we covered extensively back in 2020.
Yes.
But what we didn't know until a year after the election, because they waited, of course, until the last possible second to disclose what they'd done, one of Arabella's nonprofits gave $25 million to the main charity pass-through group for Zuckerberg's $420 million. And I would have arguments with mainstream media reporters saying, look, this is a partisan operation. Like, no, it's not. It's just a charity. If I would have been able to say, did you know Arabella gave him $25 million? I would have won those arguments, because even places like the New York Times admit that Arabella is just a massive Democrat operation.
Right, because the defense of Mark Zuckerberg at the time, to the extent anyone mounted one, was, all he's doing is help funding election administration systems in all of these states. Who could be opposed to that? And the obvious answer is, well, he's only doing it in areas that are going to benefit Democrats. And you're saying that Arabella, they also were contributing to this out of sight. And if you'd been able to bring that up, more evidence of exactly what they were up to.
Yeah, as I said, even places like the New York Times wouldn't have pretended that this was a nonpartisan operation. And I hate to tell you, but that same group that got Arabella's $25 million and 350 of Zuckerberg's $420 million, they're still around, and they're 28 states now ban that kind of funding, but the group is still trying to connive their way into local election offices around the country with things like credits. We're not giving you money, that would be illegal, but we'll give you a credit that you can spend at our partner organizations, two of whom are in the Arabella network.
So does that mean that the Zuckerbucks organization is looking to circumvent these state laws where they've, again, you pointed out 28 states have banned these types of private contributions to fund election systems. Are they looking to circumvent that?
They absolutely are. They're also using other workarounds like, in Georgia, it was illegal to give money to the election office of the local government. So the place tried to give the money to the county to then hand over to the election office within the county government.
Something I learned from following the rollout of this book and reading about you and what you've discovered here is that the amount of money here is staggering that we're talking about. These guys, these left-wing billionaires, are influencing American politics at levels that all the normal in broad daylight political fundraising doesn't even match. I think the comparison I heard you make is that you take all of the official Republican Party vehicles and all of the official Democrat Party vehicles, they pale in comparison to how much left-wing dark money is flowing.
No, that's exactly right. In the 2020 cycle, so 19 and 20, Arabella's nonprofits took in $2.4 billion, which was $1 billion more than the DNC and the RNC combined. And then in the 22 cycle, where you think, right, surely it's an off cycle, money goes down, right? Wrong. At Arabella, it went up to $3 billion, which was more than DNC, RNC, Republican Senate and House committees, Democrat Senate and House committees. You have to add another $500 million to get to what Arabella took in.
So how much does this influence conversations around issues that would seem to a normal American to be insane? Like, for instance, to preserving our open border, or saying that we can control the weather if we give the government more power, or that boys should play women's sports, which that's an issue you brought up earlier in our conversation. How many of those crazy issues are actually powered by that money?
Well, the easiest answer to all Arabella questions is everything, right? Because there's virtually no policy area that they're not a serious player in. Helped give money, for instance, to the folks who want to take your gas stove away. I mean, which is about as idiotic as you can get.
Yeah.
Or in more boring but bad stuff like, the Medicaid expansion. They fought on that all over the country. They're one, as I said, they're the biggest abortion advocacy funder in the country, really.
So at the center of so much of the chaos we're seeing is the same organization over and over and over again. And it involves some of the most famous and some of the less famous left-wing billionaires on the whole planet.
Yes, and I should have added, there are a bunch of other billionaire donors to them that all have the same last name. And you want to guess what that is, Vince?
Oh, my goodness. I'm not even going to begin. I don't want to whiff. Go ahead. What's the name?
Well, you would have whiffed because the answer is foundation, right? Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, blah, 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 blah. Lots more lefty billionaires have that name, and they are able to play in the Arabella network to their heart's content.
Yeah, so these are, I think the Ford Foundation's involved in like disarming people, right? That's one of their issues, getting rid of guns.
Oh, they're the same. I mean, Ford is easily the equal of and as bad as Soros. The left has a lot of Soroses. Oh, they're gun grabbers, but 100 other things. Ford invented the women's studies department in America. I mean, that for influence.
Sure. Okay. And so what you have is, and they're all, and if you're a foundation, that means you're probably a tax exempt organization, so that these billionaires get massive tax write-offs by pumping their money into these types of manipulations of American politics.
Exactly.
How about it? All right. Well, if people are interested in finding out about how it all works, it sounds like your book is the place to learn that. Arabella, the dark money network of leftist billionaires secretly transforming America. Scott Walter, thank you as always for doing this important work. Really appreciate your time today, sir.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Nice to talk to you. That's Scott. And again, the book is Arabella, which is a name that you've probably heard pop up from time to time in all of these various news stories. And if you're looking for what is the engine that charges the most psychotic issues in America, when you look up and you're like, what ties this all together? Why would anybody be pursuing any of this stuff? Well, there's a lot of the money right there. There's a lot of the money right there. 2020, they took in $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion. Easily dominating the fundraising efforts of both Republicans and Democrats in normal, in plain daylight fundraising. Happening right now, President Trump just stepped out to the microphones outside the courthouse as court wraps yet another day of left-wing tyranny in New York. Here is President Trump just moments ago.
So we just found out the government just said that they want 2 to 3 more weeks. That means they want to keep me off the trail for 2 to 3 more weeks. Now, anybody in there would realize there's no case. They don't have a case. Every legal scholar says they don't have a case. This is just a political witch hunt. It's election interfering. And this is really, truly election interference, and it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. And in every poll, I'm leading by a lot. And they figure maybe they can do something here. Maybe they can do. This case should be over. This case should have never been brought. By the way, Alvin Bragg didn't want to bring the case. Your previous DA didn't bring the case. The FEC said they threw it away. They said, you got to be kidding. Southern District didn't bring the case. Nobody brought the case. And then Alvin Bragg brought the case as soon as, when I'm running and leading, that's when they decided, let's go bring a case. So it's a disgrace. But we just heard 2 to 3 more weeks. I thought they were finished today. And they are finished today if you look at what's happening. I thought they were going to be finished today, and they want 2 to 3 more weeks. The judge asked them, and playing right into the judge's hands. The judge is so happy about 2 to 3 more weeks because they all want to keep me off the campaign trail. That's all this is about. This is about election interference. How do we stop it? And it's a disgrace. And then you have the other thing that maybe is even more disgraceful is the gag order, where I can't basically, I have to watch every word I tell you people. You ask me a question, a simple question, I'd like to give it, but I can't talk about it. Because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it. And frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day. But what's happening here is a disgrace, and the appellate courts ought to get involved. New York looks so bad. The New York system of so-called justice looks so bad between this judge in Gorin and Kaplan. You triple teamed with corrupt judges. Is a disgrace to our nation. So I should be out there campaigning, and they said 2, and the way I look at it, they're really talking about 3 weeks more. And by the way, they didn't even have enough to fill out the time. You know, we got out early today because they didn't have another witness. The government didn't have another witness. So they didn't even have time to fill it out. And then they complained. So I'll tell you what, I hope you report the story accurately. This is a real threat to our country, and it's a serious threat to the Constitution. In the meantime, Columbia University announced today they're not going to have their graduation. They're not going to have a ceremony. And that's happening all over the country. Our country is a mess. And the most important day in the history of our country is going to be November 5th of this year. That's called Election Day. It's going to be the most important day in the history of our country. What's going on with this judge is a disaster. Between the gag orders and the hatred he's got for me, and everybody sees it, okay, and you see it better than anybody. God bless the USA.
Is Stormy Daniels a liar? Is Michael Cohen a liar? Could you get a name to breakers?
A deliberate strategy by President Trump, giving these statements each morning and night, taking no questions, walking away. You heard him there, 2 to 3 more weeks trying to keep him off the campaign trail. That's what the government's up to. And he said this gag order is unconstitutional. And he said being thrown in jail, that's a sacrifice that's worth it for the Constitution. More on that ahead, a lot more ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show. We also have one of Trump's attorneys joining us, Will Scharf, coming up in the program. Stay with us. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up in no time at all, Congressman Mike Waltz will be here at 5 o'clock. And then we talk to Will Scharf, an attorney for President Trump, at 5:30. We'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Let's see. Oh, Nick in Purcellville is on line 1. Let's go to Nick first. Nick, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. This Sam Bankman-Fried that's doing this time for being a crypto crook, you know, with the FTX deal and the $8 billion he stole, and gave to some of it, I don't know how much, to the Democrats. Now, why aren't the feds going after the Democrats to get that money back into the hands of the people that lost it?
Yeah, no, they're acting like that's all over and let's move on. There's nothing to see here. But you're totally right. Sam Bankman-Fried, the one of the single biggest donors to Democrats in the whole country. That talk about a story where Democrats get off easy. You know, this guy is their money machine. He defrauds tons of people. And all these Democrats, they run away, and that's the end of it, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, and I mean, there's no news media, but I'm kind of disappointed that there's not a congressional hearing or testimony by, you know, bringing the Democrats in the Congress and question them about this. And where's the money?
Yeah.
And you know, isn't that against the law to take stolen property?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not above the law, are they?
They shouldn't be. And yet they keep that seems to be the case each time. I mean, these members of Congress, the insider trading, there's a lot of these guys who just act like they're above the law all the time. And that may be the latest expression of that, Nick. Thank you, Nick. It's a smart point. Nick kind of reacting to our conversation with Scott Walter here at the top of the hour, where we were talking about all of these left-wing billionaires and what they've been financing and funding through dark money organizations, tax-exempt nonprofits, a confusing web, intentionally so, of organizations that are just really distorting American politics towards things that don't matter to any of us, yet seem to be the priorities of the American left. But yeah, Sam Bankman-Fried, that guy, he gave a crap ton of cash. to the left, all of which he stole. He stole from all sorts of normal schlubs who didn't know better, and they had their savings taken by that guy. Let me get to a couple things going on. There's a huge punch list today, as always, on the show. One of them is, let me talk about Kristi Noem for a second. What's going on with the South Dakota governor? She is really something else. I don't know what she's thinking here with. Let me just explain something about American politics. Very few politicians write their own books. Very few write their own books. And books are typically timed ahead of big political announcements. You try and release a book as a predicate to a justification for your run for Senate or your run for president, or you want to be in the running for vice president or something. You basically want news cycles about you that piggyback off of the release of your book that's designed to raise your profile in the American consciousness, and certainly among the types of people who call the shots in your political party. That's what it is. That's what people do. That's why they release these books. But they don't write their own books. And we are discovering this week that Kristi Noem definitely did not write her own book. She's on a book tour promoting a book that someone else clearly wrote. And the problem with that is she doesn't seem to be aware of some of the contents of the book, or wasn't aware when they were put in and didn't review it closely enough, and now it's gone public. And these are all unforced errors. She's just stepping on rakes that she didn't have to step on. So obviously the dog story got a lot of attention a couple weeks ago, that she killed a puppy who had killed some chickens, and she was concerned that it was going to be a broader threat. It was unruly, so she took it and she shot it, and then she shot a goat, and she said, this is farm life, and this is what it's like. And it was meant to demonstrate her grit. But then, of course, dog lovers everywhere were like, what the hell? You killed a puppy? And I have a basic rule in life and in politics, but specifically in life. Don't kill dogs is a good rule. Another rule is if you're Mitt Romney, don't travel with the dog on the roof of the car. You don't have to do that. You can figure out a different way to transport the dog. And if you're Barack Obama, don't eat dogs. You know, Obama ate a dog many years ago, and he wrote about it. I think it was in Indonesia. He wrote about consuming a dog in his autobiography. He actually took a dog and he ate it. Don't do that. That's disgusting. Don't eat dogs. Don't shoot dogs. Don't put dogs on the roof of your car. Very simple rules. I don't have many rules. Those are among them. And then Kristi Noem this weekend, she goes on CBS on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. And Margaret Brennan didn't ask her a brain buster. It really wasn't much of a gotcha question. It was straight up, hey, you said in your book you met Kim Jong Un, which would be a pretty extraordinary thing. Very few world leaders have actually met Kim Jong Un. Donald Trump has met Kim Jong Un. Dennis Rodman has met Kim Jong Un. But Kristi Noem? I don't think so. I don't remember that coming up. But maybe it did. Maybe it did. So Margaret Brennan asks, it's a basic journalism question. Did you meet Kim Jong Un?
So you write about lessons learned in leadership, and you bring up some specific incidents I want to ask you about. You talk about meeting some world leaders, and one specific one, quote, I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un, I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. I've been a children's pastor after all. Did you meet Kim Jong Un?
Well, you know, as soon as this was brought to my attention, I certainly made some changes and looked at this passage, and I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we went forward and have made some edits. So I'm glad that this book is being released in a couple of days.
As soon as it was brought to my attention. So the theory, of course, based on the front of the book, is that you wrote it. So how could this passage, quote, be brought to your attention? The answer is it was a ghostwriter. Where did that anecdote come from? Did you tell it to your ghostwriter and then they wrote it down? This is the kind of slippery nonsense that people, like, everyone can smell this, right? You don't need deep political analytical insight to assess that, oh man, that she just screwed this one up. Just give us a my bad and move on, please.
Edits will be in place and that people will have the updated version.
So you did not meet with Kim Jong Un. That's what you're saying.
No, I've met with many, many world leaders. Many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. I think I've talked extensively in this book about my time serving in Congress, my time as governor, before governor, some of the travels that I've had. I'm not going to talk about my specific meetings with world leaders.
Oh, boy. Okay. And then Brennan goes on and goes, well, wait a second. So you never actually went to North Korea. And then Kristi Noem was like, well, yes, I have. Well, you did? You went to North Korea? And then listen to her explanation, and you think to yourself, she didn't go to North Korea. She went to South Korea.
But you never went to North
no
Korea.
Specifics in this book. I talk about the fact that, yes, I have. I've been there. So
you went to North Korea?
You went to the DMZ, and there are details. There are details in this book.
Well, then, if you went to the DMZ, you were standing in South Korea. You were staring at North Korea. There it is. I can see it right in front of me. And that's a pretty cool place, the DMZ. But that's not North Korea.
Talk about going to the DMZ and specifics that I'm willing to share. There's some specifics I'm not willing to share with you. I've traveled the world, and I visited with world leaders, and some of that is referenced in the book, and this anecdote is something that, when it was brought to my attention, we made some changes, and when the book's released, we'll do all that we can to see that is reflected.
There was another portion where, I don't know what happens here. There have been times where people who are caught in embarrassing television interviews start pretending like the earpiece isn't working. I'm not saying Kristi Noem did this exactly, but at one point she starts saying, hello, like she can't hear the other end, which we've seen all sorts before.
I'm asking about that specifically because you made the point to bring him up twice, and that he was a little tyrant.
Do you have a question for me, Margaret?
Yes, I do. South Korea is a treaty ally. North Korea is a nuclear-armed adversary. So that's a pretty big thing to confuse.
It says hello.
I know you read this book before it was published because you released video of your recording of the audiobook. You didn't catch these errors when you were recording it?
Oh, that's an interesting question because, if assuming a ghostwriter wrote it, she's reading the passages like straight into a microphone.
Oh, Margaret, as soon as it was brought to my attention, I took action to make sure that it was reflected.
And then Kristi Noem then at that point decides that she's had enough of suffering on national television in this way. And then she tries to turn the tables on Margaret Brennan and say, you're the problem with American politics.
What is so discouraging about politics and the media today is that we have the White House that just recently came out and confirmed that President Joe Biden has misspoken, has made mistakes.
This is actually true. This is a true point that she's raising. Like all this fact checking you're doing on my book, where's the fact check on this idea that Biden was arrested visiting Nelson Mandela, or that he was a truck driver, or that he got started in the civil rights movement, or that he was in the black church, or that he was growing up in the Puerto Rican community. We don't see any similar aggression. This is a true point that Kristi Noem brings up very late in this interview, where she's already, she's got rake marks all over her face from having stepped on them.
Has even outright lied over close to 150 times just this year, and you've done.
Wait a second. Wait, let me pause on that for a moment. You're welcome, Kristi Noem. That talking point comes straight to you from. It's kind of a team effort between the Vince Coglianese Show and the Daily Caller, where I have the luxury of being an editor. We were sitting here on this program going, how many times has Biden had his remarks corrected by the White House this year? And I asked the Daily Caller guys, hey, would you dig into this? They did. They did an analysis. They said 148, was it 148? 148 or 146, somewhere in the vicinity, just under 150 times, that the White House says this year alone that they have had to correct Joe Biden's remarks. So a hat tip to Kristi Noem there for bringing up data originally found right here on this program.
To 150 times just this year, and you've done nothing to question him on any of that. And you're talking about a book that hasn't been released yet, that's been corrected before it's been released, and you haven't said one thing about Joe Biden saying that he was in prison.
Okay, so can I pause? I want to give her some advice here. It's too late for this, but it's retroactive. That's the talking point you should have used in the first place. All this other stuff about once I found out about the passage, I changed it. That thing she just said, which is we found out about that before the book was released and we changed it. So all she had to say at the beginning of the interview was like, what you're referencing is a draft. That is not the final copy of the book. That was a mistake. It should have never been in there. I don't know how it got in there. Whatever you want to say about that, but you could have just leaned on the draft explanation from the get-go, and she didn't. I was like listening to this going, wait a second, you should have brought that up in the first place. You could have skipped past the rest of this.
Nelson Mandela, that he started the civil rights movement. That
If I had an interview with Joe Biden, who I've asked for multiple times, I will definitely ask him about his record. But I'm asking you about your book here, which we have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think. Look, if Margaret Brennan does it, then I'll be very impressed. If she ends up landing the Biden interview and she's asking for him to account for every corn pop story he's ever told, sure, okay, I'll give you a round of applause. But that's not it. That's not it. Let's see. Bill is in Rockville, line 2. Bill, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. I've been listening to this, and I can only think of Margaret Brennan as Katie Couric 2.0. This is nothing new. They went after Sarah Palin like this, asking her who the vice premier is of Sri Lanka. The correct answer by Palin back then should have been, I don't know, Katie. Do you know? I'll get up to speed on that with Senator McCain.
Right.
At the time, she was the pick for McCain's campaign, of course, back in 2008. And Sam Donaldson used to ask very pointed questions, kind of gotcha questions of Ronald Reagan. This is nothing new. Conservatives come under attack when going into an election year like this, and they just have to be more careful about.
That's true. But Bill, one of the things that, remember, Katie Couric asked Sarah Palin was asking her like what she reads, and she's trying to prove her to be some big dummy. But in Kristi Noem's case, this is a book that she's got her name on. And she's making claims about her own biography that aren't true at all. So one of the pieces here is, as you point out, is like you're making mistakes that they're using against you. But this is like these are obvious unforced errors, don't you think?
I think so. I think that's on Noem there. She should have done a little more. Her due diligence would have been keep an eye on the writer of your book,
right?
And should have had somebody else in there running interference for her. And I don't know when the release date was on this or how much time Kristi Noem had to, but she threw her faith in this ghostwriter or whoever worked on the book, and yes, that is on her.
I know, and now she's been
pointing out the history of these gotcha journalism, which I can't stand.
I agree with you on that. There's quite a bit of that because they're all, of course, rooting on the left. That is definitely the animating force here. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the call on that. It's anyway. I don't know why she's continuing the book tour with the lefty networks. Really, to Bill's point, why are you doing that? Why are you? She just got done with the whole dog saga like 3 days ago, and then she's back. She's on CBS. What did she expect? What did she think was going to happen over the course of that interview? You're the best, Kristi Noem. Tell us about the book. What's your favorite part? No, that's not. As Bill points out, that's not the treatment she's going to get. It's 4:51 now. All right, we've got Andrew calling in from Jefferson, line 4. Andrew, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Yes. If that New York judge puts Trump in jail, he has Secret Service protection. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a logistical nightmare for them.
It's a huge, huge issue trying to figure out how you...
So I don't know if that guy's even thought about it, and I'm sure Trump would like to test that theory.
Yeah, Trump's already indicating is like if that's what it takes, that's a small sacrifice to protect the Constitution. And this gag order that the judge has imposed on him is just nakedly unconstitutional. He's not allowed to defend himself in the face of all these attacks. It's absurd. But you're right. If they put him in jail, he would require Secret Service protection to be with him in the jail cell. They've got to be guarding him at all times. What is he going to mix it up with the inmate community? I don't think so. I don't think that's happening. And I think it was on the Dan Bongino program a couple weeks ago. Dan, being a Secret Service guy himself, there was some conversation not only on the physical safety of the president, but remember, everything that's inside of his head from his time as president of the United States, it deserves safekeeping as well. The nation's secrets inside what Elon Musk calls the meat computer of the former president of the United States. That's a computer worth protecting. And that's why the American people need to do that. That's crazy. We're going to throw Trump in jail. These people are out of their minds. Coming up, Will Scharf is going to join us in the next hour. We'll talk to him at 5:30 about all of this. He's an attorney for President Trump. And Congressman Mike Waltz, well, he's just minutes away. We talked to him about Hamas's latest activities. They claim they've accepted a deal. Israel hasn't made one.